Realm presents The Vela Salvation, Episode 10.
The ship broke through the atmosphere, but even as the gravity lifted, Asala felt a weight on her shoulders. She peered at the Gandesian fleet, still small in the distance. Asala glanced at the fuel gauge, taking stock of how much was left after burning their engines through the launch. It was enough to get them there, but not enough to get them out. She had to conserve fuel. It was always good to have an exit strategy. Clicking on the onboard systems, Asala powered down their engines, settling the ship into the right orbit. They would catch up to the base in a matter of hours. "Gravity's down," Niko called out from the cargo bay. "Yeah," Asala said. "That was me. There should be some lock boots somewhere back there. And grab some for me while you're at it." Asala heard Niko rummaging in the back, followed by a light thud and a very soft ow. Asala couldn't help but smile to herself, only burying it away when she felt Niko's familiar presence beside her. It was hard to believe that their paths had once again collided after the galaxies tore them apart. Before the evac, Niko was a surprising companion. Surprising in that Asala didn't mind them. In fact, Asala had grown to care for them in a way. Asala glanced over at Niko. "It's like old times." Niko said nothing as they sat surprisingly rigid in their seat. And Asala wondered if she had said something wrong. Of course she had. Asala Siku, the Grand Communicator. That title would not be something she'd find on her epitaph. Niko was different somehow. Asala couldn't quite put a finger on it. And it wasn't because their newly printed body was strangely poreless. When they first met, Niko was this inexperienced but budding young diplomat. On the very mission that started all of this, Ekram had set his youngest child on Asala, like an intern. She could almost have used the word naive, but that wasn't exactly right. Niko was a bright and overly optimistic star you'd hope would never disappear. But this person sitting beside her now was not that same Niko. There was caution in them now, and walls that were built up to guard something fragile underneath. Niko had their screens onto rear view, watching Salvation as it passed. "It's a great place. Lots of water and resources. And a fungus that plays by its own set of rules." All this time, that fungus wasn't infiltrating their bodies to harm them. It was trying to communicate with them. Instead of words, it used their memories, their emotions, to assemble messages. That was their language. Asala was so used to speaking her mind that she didn't realize that there were other ways to do it. "I'm just saying." Niko kept their eyes on the screen, tracing the outline of Salvation's western coast. "Anyone would choose to leave for this. Niko." Asala rested her eyes on Niko, their head craned down, and their expression unable to hide behind a mop of hair like they usually did. "It's not exactly fun to be left alone," they said. And then their eyes turned stark, like they went to a dark place. "Did you kill my father? I saw that you were there with him at Camp Gala. 2 dots on the radar, dancing around each other, until all of a sudden there was just one." Asala shut her eyes, trying to will the memory out of her head. "That's what you thought all this time?" "What else could I think? You left. I couldn't even ask you." Niko dug their fingers hard into the armrest. "So did you?" "Yes," Asala said, just then noticing Niko's hands shoved deep inside their jacket pockets. Then Niko stood up, rage brewing in their eyes like a storm. Asala could see herself in those eyes because she had felt it all before. Asala remained seated. Your father was hit in battle. His helmet was cracked. Akram was my friend, and in those last moments, he would have suffered. Did I kill him? Yes. It had to be done. Niko pulled out a pistol, pointing it right at Asala. Their arm was curved, and their stance was awkward. But a weapon was still a weapon, no matter how experienced the shooter. Asala remained alert, but didn't back down, watching the fury of emotion play out in Niko's eyes. I know what you're thinking. You want someone to blame. You never got to say goodbye. But let me tell you something you need to hear. During his last moments, all your father could talk about was you. Niko, do you get what I'm trying to say? Niko's eyes fell. They lowered the pistol to their side and let it float weightlessly. Asala grabbed it, making sure that the charge was off. Niko turned around, retreating back to the cargo bay. Wait. Asala stood up, ready to go after them. I thought you didn't want to be left alone. But Niko kept walking in their own solitude. I got used to it. The ship stayed on course. Inside, it remained silent. Asala was in the pilot's seat, and Niko was nowhere to be seen. It was only when she gained sight of Orbit's modular space station that Asala stood up. She walked to the cargo bay, her footsteps clicking as the boots locked to the path. She found Niko unclamped, curled into a ball and spinning slowly adrift. We are approaching their base. I'm going to need your help. Niko made no move to answer. Asala turned to make her way back to the front deck when she heard Niko's voice. Your sister isn't going to change her mind. She wants to open that wormhole. I'll have to talk to her then, convince her. That'll be the day, to see Asala Siku use her words before her fists. Niko muttered not so quietly. Do you even know why she wants to open it? Why she wants to go back there? They said it like they already had an idea, and of course, that irked her. Because Asala could never understand what was going on in her sister's head. You know, you grew a set since we last met, Asala said. If you don't want the people on that planet to die, then you know what you might have to do. It's easy for you. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew it could go down that road. Killing is never easy, Niko. Especially if she had to do that to her sister. Dio was the only blood family she had left. She made her way toward the exit. Are you sure I can count on you for this? You should know my answer by now, Niko said. Let's save the world. And if it were anyone else other than them, Asala wouldn't have believed it. That was something that hadn't changed. Niko's selflessness. She hoped it was something that Niko clung to fiercely, because once that was gone, there wasn't much left. Hana spotted her sister's ship before anyone else. If she hadn't been awake, going over her plans, she wouldn't have seen it. She had barely slept in the past few weeks. A military commander was only as strong as their plan. So her mind was always racing, trying to stay ahead, trying to troubleshoot any obstacles before the fleet encountered them. She had to feel in control, especially since during her younger years, she was completely without it. Submit to your fate, the High-Passion people had said. It was the popular mindset when their planet had started to freeze. Well, screw fate. Joining the Gandesian military taught her to fight. If it looked like they would lose, it was up to her to figure out a way to spit in fate's face. The training she went through, the protocol, the structure, it was all about instilling discipline in those first wild years as cadets when their minds were unyielding. They were limber willow stalks, blowing wherever the wind whispered, when their minds needed to be strong like the trunk of a fossil tree. That was how the military shaped them through discipline. She wasn't unlike any other cadet. She had thought it was annoying at first. But she soon started to see. With discipline came control. That was the true tip of the spear. She learned very quickly that was your leg up against the unknown, and your way to wrangle your life back from so-called fate. And that was exactly why she was pouring all her energy into her next steps. Her plans had to be bulletproof, and if they weren't, then it was only her own fault that she hadn't thought of another plan to fix it. Failing to retrieve the exotic matter was a setback, a visible failure to the rest of her fleet. It was not her best moment as commander. That was when Uzochi delivered the news. She had figured out another way to procure exotic matter. The fungus was a new discovery, a sentient life form that regulated the balance of the planet below. It was also combustible, creating a valuable byproduct. There would be more than enough exotic matter to open a new wormhole for more than mere fleeting moments. But to do that, Hana would be sentencing the planet below to the same cruel fate she had fought against as a child. Her heart grew heavy as memories of Hypatia pulled at her. She shook her head, trying to keep her emotions in line. Don't forget your mission. Bring everyone home. She looked down at the planet below. The exotic matter was all there. She just had to take it. She would open that wormhole no matter what. Not even her sister could stop her. Asala had no right to come back into her life and erase everything she had worked for. Private Adeo, her second in command, stepped up to her. What would you like to do, Commander Hana? Hana stared at her sister's approaching ship. Give the order. Her voice rose. I want everyone armed and ready. As commander, she was ready for a fight, but she was also responsible for the lives of her officers. She would need to be careful. If it all went to hell, they were still the future of Ganda. And what was she without her soldiers? Asala finished zipping up the rest of her suit. The meters on the screen of her visor flashed the suit's environmental controls. Beside her, Niko strapped an advanced mobile system around their wrist. Are you ready? Asala asked, and she tossed over the pistol that Niko had pointed at her not long ago. It's not going to be easy. I should be saying that to you, Niko said. Asala was not looking forward to her reunion with her sister. She and Dio used to be good with words, but as the years went by, they had lost that ability. Asala could read poetry and literature for days on end. She read about the tragedy of Eifer, the sky goddess who lost her cloud child and wept. She could recite the poem about the cold heart of the spirit Fine, who fought and failed to keep the fire stoked within. She felt the pain and drama of these tales, but she still, for the life of her, could never speak her own words to her sister. That was a story that she would never tell, and oh, she wanted to. But it was so hard. So Niko was right. For her, it was not going to be easy. Without words, she and her sister had only one other option. We're coming up on our load-off point, Niko said. Asala glanced up to see the Gandesian fleet, where Dio was waiting for her. They were a long way off from the snow-filled fields of Hypatia. All this time, she had hoped the cold would freeze it all in place. But by now, the snow angels that they made were long gone, buried in that wasteland of white, and the stories they spoke into the wind had disappeared. Asala grabbed her pack from the cargo bay, filled with her arm cannon and an arsenal of other weapons that would serve her. This was how she spoke now, and she knew her sister was the same. Hana met everyone at the loading docks. Equipped with fully charged pulse rifles, the majority of her force stood in defense formation as they were trained to. She made her way to Adeo, who was waiting on the side. "Where's Uzochi?" Private Adeo saluted her. "She and her team are secure on the Vela. We have guards stationed in front of their airlock." "Good," Hana said. They needed Uzochi safe if they wanted their mission to succeed. "I've overheard a few grumblings from some of the officers." Private Adeo lowered her voice. "May I ask something? And I hope this doesn't sound like insubordination." "It already does." Hana cut her off. General Sinrig would have been furious if Hana had so much as implied anything like that in her presence. "But I am not a tyrant," Hana continued. "Tell me what they were saying." "They were questioning your use of resources." Adeo's eyes rose to hers. "Uzochi is telling everyone you're losing sight of the goal, that you care more about the refugee settlers on that planet than the welfare of your own people. There's a growing faction that agrees." They thought she was growing soft. "I'm a trained soldier. I live and fight for Gonda. I know the mission. I see it very clearly," Hana said coolly, but inside she felt the anger sharpen like knives. This was what she had feared. Allegiances were shifting to Uzochi. Everything Hana did was for her soldiers. She had bled to keep them safe and raced into the unknown to retrieve the resources they needed to survive. And this was how her officers repaid her. Right now, she didn't have time to deal with that slippery balance of power. The immediate threat was her sister. "Aren't we being overly cautious? Activating the whole fleet against one person?" Hana clenched her jaw. "You don't know Agent Asala very well." Hana had flown in the same skies as her sister, and while she had more elite training, Asala had held her own with a ragtag fleet of hobbled space junk piloted by inexperienced refugees from Camp Gala. On top of that, Asala's reputation as Ekram's mercenary dog was known by most in the military circles. So they weren't being overly cautious. They were being prepared. She turned back to the opening of the flight deck and waited as Asala's starship approached. Even from a distance, Hana could see the damage it had taken in its journey. Scorched paneling, a wing that was completely askew. The only thing that appeared to be in good condition were the cockpit windows, which appeared to be brand new and not Gandesian regulation. As commander, she needed to keep her outward reactions in control. But she couldn't help but shake her head, knowing all the trouble her sister had gotten into. Wherever Asala went, a battle always erupted out of nowhere. It was like the fight followed her, or maybe Hana hoped this wasn't true. Asala was the one chasing it. Perhaps even savoring it. Hana was a soldier herself, but at least she knew when to look forward to the end of battle. When the dust cleared and she and her forces had won, that was the moment when she'd once again be reunited with her family. That was why she fought. Asala's ship hovered before them, the noisy thrum of its thrusters blasting heat upon their faces as it lowered onto the deck. Hana stared at it. This would be another battle to get through. She looked over at Private Adeo. "Bring her out here." Adeo made her way to the cruiser, touched her ID to the door, and disappeared inside. After a minute, she ducked her head back out of the entryway with a perplexed expression on her face, a constant wiggle from her eyebrows to her lips. "What's wrong?" Hana asked, and she felt the strong shield inside her crack. "Discipline," she reminded herself. "Control." "Commander," Private Adeo said. "They're not in there." "Impossible!" Hana stormed over to the open door, pushing Adeo to the side. With her rifle charged and ready, she angled her head, getting a clear view of the front deck, both its driver and passenger seats empty. Had Asala sent her ship back to orbit on its own? Or perhaps there was another reason the vessel was unoccupied, a tactic of some sort. Hana's eyes narrowed as her thoughts roped around the latter. Well played, sister. Well played. Asala's boots clicked securely onto the surface of the base's western nodes. Out here, everything looked the same, minus Uzochi's ship, located on the westernmost end. The Gandesian ships that had survived the evac, no matter the make and model, all suggested the same smooth, black, deadly efficiency. The paneling was designed to hide all the nooks and crannies. From a distance, the whole carrier, with all of the extra ships airlocked side by side on each end, looked like a large boomerang with a gaping maw for the flight deck in its center. Uzochi's orb-like ship was the only thing that looked out of place, like a tumor. The clean exterior loaned no landmarks to help anchor her to where she was going. Asala couldn't even gauge distance. "God's damn Gandesian ships," she muttered to herself. "It's so hard to find anything out here." She looked over to Niko, who was focused on a holographic map floating above their palm. "Are you sure we landed on the right node?" They had jumped ship well before they got into the flight deck sightlines. And by jumped ship, she literally meant jumped. Secured into their envirolocked suits, Asala had opened the cargo ramp, while Niko timed their exit to be close to the missile bay. She clamped a cord between their two suits, because if she hadn't, she was sure Niko would be left spiraling through space. Using the air thrusters built into her suit, she managed to guide them down to the base's exterior while their own ship passed overhead en route to its destination, minus its key passengers. Asala figured the arrival of an empty vessel would be a good distraction while they set off to do what they needed to do. How she loved a good diversion. The flashier, the better. The one shit thing about diversions, though, was that she rarely got to see the look on her enemy's face when they figured out how badly they'd been played. But for this one, she did not want to see Daio's reaction. She hadn't expected, never in a million years, to use all of her strategic cunning against her sister. Her footsteps magnetically clamped down as they made their way around the exterior hull. One step after another, as if there were no end in sight. "How much longer?" Niko's voice rang through the speakers in her helmet. "You lived on this space station for how long?" 3 months, Asala replied. Niko turned back to her in the distance. "Can you see my face?" "No," Asala said. "There's a sun glare bouncing off the visor." "That's too bad, because this is the face I have for when I'm judging you. Why don't you know your way around by now?" Niko's voice was bitter and cold. They were obviously still upset at her, but now, clamped to the surface of a hostile ship, wasn't really the time to take a moment and smooth things over.
Trust me, I tried.
Asala said.
But everything in this ship is locked down with passwords and security.
Asala had expected no less from a Gandesian warship.
It appears that you know this place better than I do. When I first made contact with this side, I was printed right here on this ship. I saw some of Uzochi and the commander's communications before my skin suit failed and I got zapped out.
Niko explained. Niko always had a knack for finding information.
That was how you figured out their plans with the exotic matter and the fungus.
Asala said.
And where they're keeping their missiles.
Niko added.
Perfect.
Asala said.
Then all we have to do is get in there and deactivate them. This is so like you,
Niko said. A quick but brutal comment. Asala's voice rose, matching Niko's aggressive pitch.
What do you mean? It's just a roundabout way for you not to talk to your sister. If she wants to destroy the world,
Asala said,
then I'll have to take away her toys.
Niko grunted through the speakers.
My face, Asala, it's judging you. Again.
Niko's silent anger had quickly turned to fierce taunting. But Asala welcomed it. At least it wasn't the cold shoulder treatment. In Asala's opinion, it was a healthier way of communicating anger. It was something Asala could react to, whereas with her sister, there was nothing. How do you break the ice when it had grown into a glacier? Speaking with her sister now, after everything they'd survived, would probably be the hardest thing she'd ever done. Asala stared after Niko as they fired more taunts at her through their comms frequency. She suddenly remembered her lost friend Ekram. But it was more than friendship. Was it possible to feel kinship with somebody other than your own blood? Ekram had joked with her too, but he had also encouraged her, nurtured her, in ways that only a father should do. She missed his presence. Talking with Niko, it felt like Ekram was there in a way.
You're awfully quiet back there,
Niko said. Asala glanced up at Niko, who had the same eyes as Ekram.
I know I'm not perfect. I hadn't been the best person to you and your family, but I'm glad that you're here to help me. To be clear, I'm doing this to save the people down there, not for you,
Niko said, as they turned back to the path, and Asala could only see the back of their suit. But then their voice drifted in through her speakers.
You were loyal to my father. I know that now. And us?
There was a pause, and she could almost hear Niko's breath as it bled into the calm static.
It's gonna take time.
Their answer gave Asala something she hadn't believed in for a while. It gave her hope. Asala was never good with her words, but she knew the power of actions. So she sped up her pace and walked beside Niko. Despite the tension between them, they were still partners in this mission, like so many missions before. She didn't know when it happened, when she stopped seeing Niko as a naive child, but rather as someone who was strong and capable, someone she would trust with her life. Niko crouched and wiped the space dust off the carrier's surface, exposing the lettering underneath.
We're here.
The surface bore no hinges, nothing that remotely resembled the outline of a hatch.
There's no way in.
Niko held up their hand.
What's that famous quote by Vela Bach? All good things come after the long road of patience.
Asala finished, but then waved her hands even more impatiently.
Yes, I know.
Vela Bach was the leader of the neo-productivity renaissance. She had read their philosophical musings, which required patience in itself. Niko's hands scurried against the metal surface until they uncovered a barely visible notch. They tugged on it, revealing a tiny data port. Niko pulled out a cord from their arm unit, plugged it into the carrier's mainframe, and went to work.
This could take a moment,
Niko warned. Asala grumbled.
How long is a moment? Do I have to repeat Bach's quote again? Besides, you can't blast your way through this like you usually do.
Niko knocked a gloved fist on the ship's thick surface.
This hull is made of 2 solid meters of titanium alloy.
Asala crossed her arms. Niko did have a point.
What should I do while I wait?
Niko shrugged.
Think? Reflect? You're not gonna have the time to do that once you get down there.
Think? She would have her moments of reflection once she had won. Usually she had some idea of what winning would look like. It was normally some configuration of completely decimating the bad guys. It was easy to pick out her enemies. Drug kingpin, bad guy. Warlord, bad guy. Oppressive dictator, obvious bad guy. But who was the enemy here? Was it truly her sister?
You said something before about why my sister wants to reopen the wormhole. I don't understand it. I know she left people behind, but at least she's alive. And with me. I thought I'd never see Dio again, but the gods gave us another chance.
Niko was quick to interrupt.
The gods gave you another chance, but I'm pretty sure your sister didn't like leaving her family stranded in a dying star system. You do know she has a family, right? I know they exist. Unbelievable.
Niko sighed as they kept on working.
She's not like a figurine that was trapped in some glass display while you were apart. You know, the kind where you shake it and there's snow flurrying all about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Asala said.
You haven't seen them in the museums in Kayam? They're like ancient relics that had no real use whatsoever, but they're fun to look at. No.
Asala answered flatly.
I was too busy assassinating political insurgents for your father.
It was only then that Niko finally looked at her. The glare on their visor less severe, so she could now see the honest expression on their face.
Fine. I'll skip the metaphor. Here's a dose of truth for you, Asala. You act like you know your sister, but you really don't. I have over a dozen siblings from both of my parents, and I still know who they have crushes on, who they despise, and what they want to do with their lives. Can you say the same about Hana? Hana Avit Medina is not her real name,
Asala insisted.
The Gandhisians forced it upon her.
Niko snorted.
Are you sure about that?
Asala wanted to escape this conversation, but instead she was stuck there, stewing in her own thoughts. Her sister's name was Dio. That was the name that tied them to their past, that tied them together. Niko's fingers slowed to a rest.
There it is,
they said finally. A cylindrical panel hissed as it lowered and rotated out of its place. Asala peered down into the mysterious hole, the length of it unknown as it extended into the dark depths.
What's this? It's a missile shaft.
Niko motioned to the ladder bolted into its siding.
It'll get us to where we need to be.
Asala crouched down and looked into the tunnel that would lead to the belly of this beast. That was where her sister would be. She drew a long breath.
Let's go.
Hana divvied up her troops. She had assigned separate units to scour different sections of the ship for Asala. But even then, she could feel their reluctance and her own power fading. Her officers were starting to think her emotions were clouding her judgment. She needed to somehow regain the trust of her fleet. But now, there were 2 vipers in her nest, and she had to be careful where she stepped. Private Adeo stood beside her. Where to? You're not coming with me. Hana then pulled Adeo close so that no one else could hear. I need you to have eyes on Uzochi. She knew how tricky the professor could be. Hana saw the way Uzochi had handled the incident at Camp Gala and heard how she had played cat and mouse with Kaim's president Ekram. Unfortunately, without Uzochi, she would have no way to open the wormhole. Her eyes rose to Adeo's. Right now, you are the only one I can trust. That's why I should come with you, Adeo insisted. If Agent Asala is as dangerous as you say, I'll be fine, Adeo. Hana cut in. Asala could blast through all of you with no problem. That is true. But it's obvious what my sister's weakness is. Hana took a deep breath. It's me. Hana still had the mind of a poet. Without the observant abilities she had honed from her writing, she would never have grown as a strategist. Ice, mist, vapor, onward. She needed that transformation to become who she was today. And that was the commander of this fleet. What are you going to do when you find her? Adeo asked. She loaded the charges in her pulse rifle. Remind her of the strength of Ganda. Careful! Asala watched Niko push at the last rung of the ladder, using their velocity to float down. Their boot's magnetic anchoring system clicked as it made contact with the ground. The gravity in this node was less than the rest of the ship, so the Gandesian fleet could power their entire arsenal at full force. But what arsenal? Asala floated mid-step, twisting her body to gain a sense of her surroundings. The space was bathed in faint overhead light, but the bay itself was empty. You said this was where they kept their missiles. It is. Niko brushed their hand against the textured wall. Thousands of orb-like protrusions lined the columns. Drones, Asala realized. When it came to orbital warfare, drones were the Gandesian way. But Asala had only seen them in action, never dormant like this. Can you hack into their AI system? Asala knew how integrated these networks were, so she had to clarify. And can you do it discreetly? I'm not one of those ego hackers who likes to stamp their name on everything they do. Leaving your signature in the code is gaudy. Niko waved their hands dismissively. All I have to do is disrupt the frequency coming from the AI system's mainframe signal beacon and reroute it so the drones are communicating with another source. Asala did her best to wrap her head around Niko's tech jargon. It's not like there's another command server lying around. Of course there is, Niko said with a smile. There's me. Asala stared at Niko like they were speaking another language. Is that even possible? Niko shrugged. I'm basically a biomechanical mobile server. It's worth a shot. Asala studied Niko. While they were in a new, organically composed body, Niko's consciousness was still present and vulnerable. Can your system handle that type of load? There's only one way to find out. Niko clapped their hands together as they pulled up the screens for the current server, but they didn't start typing like they normally would. Instead, Niko unzipped their envirosuit, pulling their thin arms out through the bulky sleeves and letting the top half of the suit hang by their waist. Do you have a knife on you? Asala unclipped her field knife from her pouch and handed it to them. Perfect. Niko took it without hesitation and then pointed the tip at the side of their torso, underneath the bottom rib. Niko, no! Asala moved to stop them, but the tip of the knife had already torn through the thin compression fabric of their shirt and was buried deep in Niko's flesh. Niko pulled out the knife, breathing through the discomfort. It's okay. Just gotta With their fingers, Niko fished through their synthetic flesh, the clear bio-blood dripping like slime down their arm. Finally, they pulled out a loose wire from within. They took the knife and sliced it open, revealing the data coils nested inside. With the bio-blood on their fingers, they were having trouble separating the data coil. Too damn slippery. Asala placed a hand on Niko's back. She could feel Niko's body trembling. Here. Asala took the wire that coiled out of Niko's body. Let me. Plug me into the server, Niko instructed. Asala swiveled the AI missile server around, unhooked the main wire, then gently plugged in Niko's wire in its place. All the while, Asala studied Niko nervously. Niko's breathing slowed, and their pupils dilated. I'm in. Now, I have to tell these drones who's boss. Suddenly, the overhead lights cut out, replaced with a glaring red glow. Warning lights. Asala made her way to the airlock of the missile bay. They found out we are here. I'll stall for time. She looked back at Niko, hoping this wouldn't be the last time she'd see them. Be safe. The words were enough for Niko to raise their eyes. You too? Asala tapped on the entry sensor, and the sealed doorway opened up into a larger warehouse filled with missile parts. She retracted her helmet for better sight and mobility. The air inside was stuffy from the recycled ventilation. Keeping low, she moved to a column of missile shells, trying to get a sense of her surroundings. Around the corner, she heard the groan of shifting metal, followed by muted voices and the clack of approaching footsteps. She crouched and tuned her earpiece to pinpoint their movement. By the clatter, she could tell there were maybe 15 soldiers. She was never one for bets, but even she knew 1 versus 15 wasn't good odds. She waited and listened to their footsteps. Eventually, one of the soldiers grew close. Their shadow stretched across the floor. The others were far enough away and out of sight. Asala pressed her body close to the missile hulls, as if she were metal herself. She saw the sliver of a foot, then a shoulder. Another step, and he was past her. She lunged, enveloping him in a chokehold. He struggled, but it was useless. His strength waned, and she lowered him to the floor. Across the way, a group of soldiers was en route to the missile bay. Crap.
Niko, you hear me?
She said into the microphone linked to her jaw piece. Transmission static crinkled in her earpiece.
Yeah,
They said.
everything okay out there? Tell me you're almost done because you got a pack coming for you.
Asala was ready to pommel past them and haul Niko the hell out of there. This time, she wouldn't abandon them. She would make sure that Niko was safe.
I need a sec. Several seconds, actually.
Then she would give them that.
Hang back. It's about to get noisy. Try not to blow the place up.
Niko warned. She was in a warehouse full of stray missile parts, after all. Any stray blast could set off the entire place. And that one big boom would be the end of the line. There was only one thing she could do. As the soldiers closed in on the missile bay doors, Asala stood up from her hiding place. Hey! Her voice pinged against the walls. All at once, their flashlights flared into her eyes as their scopes trained on her. Looking for me? And then she took off running. They fired at her, the blasts landing hot at her feet. Keep 'em coming, she thought, as long as they were firing in her direction and away from planet-ending nuclear weapons. She did love a good diversion. She scrambled past an aisle of crates, her hearing focused on their footsteps. One group was coming from behind, but another set of footsteps was... She swiveled right, catching their flashlights heading her way. They had flanked her. She's here! She's here! They yelled. They fired, and she pivoted, making a break for it. She sprinted, eyes racing, as she scanned her environment. There. Asala skittered around a corner and maneuvered herself into the cover of a smaller corridor. She edged backward, trying to stay as light on her feet as possible, until finally her back hit the wall. She cursed to herself. It was a dead end. Only a matter of time now before they found her. She aimed her arm cannon at the corridor's opening. Her ear implants were dialed up, so she could hear everything that was going on around the corner. Footsteps raced toward her, but then they stopped. And a new sound, like a high-pitched chorus of deafening whistles layered on top of each other. "Hold the line!" she heard one of them yell. "There's too many of them!" screamed someone else. What the hell is happening out there? A flash of light seared her eyes. One of the soldiers had set off a light grenade, but she couldn't tell why. Blinking so her eyes could regain focus, she saw the body of a soldier being hurled in the distance. She edged forward, her pistol still trained on the small gap in the corridor, which contained only a very narrow view of the battle beyond. She reached the edge of the wall. A soldier ran past and spotted her. "Help me! Please, help me!" But it was too late. Something swooped down on him. A blur of metal and whirring parts. It grabbed him by the waist and threw him hard against the wall. With a finalizing crack, his body slumped down to the ground. She heard the same layered whistle above her, and she knew that whatever attacked him was upon her. She aimed her weapon at it, tracking its insect-like head and chaotic limbs. It was a drone. Instead of attacking Asala, it swirled past her in a blur. It floated downward, gently coming to a stop before Niko, who was now standing in the middle of the warehouse. More missile drones floated above them, while the rest of the soldiers lay unconscious at their feet. "Guess what?" Niko said, as they panted from physical exertion. But even then, their lips curled in a grin. "It worked." "Gods," Asala muttered as she lowered her weapon. "You gained control of their entire drone arsenal?" Niko shook their head. "I'd say like 50%. It was getting noisy out here, so I thought I'd come out and help." Asala walked over to them, the drones chirruping at her as she passed. Asala had never seen anything like this before. Then she looked over at Niko, who had started curling over from fatigue. Asala rushed to them, catching them before they could fall. The incision site on their side looked ugly, but the bio-blood had coagulated. "Are you okay?" She couldn't hide the panic in her voice. "Bit of a strain on my system," Niko admitted, "but I'll be fine." Fine wasn't good enough. "No, this isn't sustainable. You could get hurt, and we can't fend them off forever." She wished this was going to be easy, but there was no way around it. To keep Salvation safe, to keep Niko safe, the best plan was to go after the person who was calling the shots. She looked over at Niko, who ended up being wiser than her in so many ways. "You are right. There's only one way to stop this." Asala loaded fresh charges into her arm cannon. "I need to find my sister." Hana marched at the head of her unit as they made their way to the missile bay. After she hadn't heard from the soldiers dispatched there, she knew that her sister had gotten to them. It was possible that she'd need reinforcements. She calmed over to Adeo, who was still stationed at Uzochi's lab. "Private Adeo," she said. "Report your status." All she heard was static. She hoped that she was just a reckless grunt, slow to answer her commander. Yet she couldn't shake the alarm bells ringing inside her. When she looked up, something was off with their unit's formation. Where there should be a tight line of marching bodies, there were now gaps. She turned and clenched her jaw at what she saw. Half of her soldiers had fallen back, their rifles aimed right at her. It was a goddamn mutiny. The way to the captain's deck was eerily quiet. They should have been at Asala's throat by now. Where are the rest of the Gandesian troops? The hallways reeked of a familiar smell. It was a scent that came in dense, thick layers. The metallic trace of fallen blood. The crisp ozone tinge of charge smoke. But the worst was what lay underneath it all. A more foreboding scent overwhelmed this battlefield. The smell of death. She passed a line of dead soldiers, their uniforms now wrinkled and torn. She recognized some of them as Daio's advisors. Judging by their injuries and the scorches on the wall, there had been a skirmish. But against who? There was no one else on this fleet but Gandesians. Some of their faces bore looks of confusion, some pain. But then others had the same expression Ekram took on moments before death came for him. She wondered if her face would look like Ekram's when death was upon her too. That calm glaze that settled in the eyes, like his vision had opened to something else entirely. As a soldier, she had to have a grip on that finality. The celebrated battle pilot Nikina Parto's last words were, "I see it now. That world between seconds of time. It lies in the road beyond." Perhaps this was the beginning of that road. It would be a path that she'd walk with her sister. Guns pointed at each other's hearts. How had it gotten this bad? There was an old story that she had heard from a history scholar in Kayam about a 100-year war between two families. It was a tragic tale. Lots of slashed throats. Everyone died. The most tragic part about it was that the matriarchs of the two clans once had an inseparable friendship that was soured by some misunderstanding. There were academic papers that theorized what that misunderstanding could be. But to this day, it still remained a mystery. She had argued with the Kayami history scholar that day, wondering why the two matriarchs didn't talk their way through it. But history often repeated itself, and that wasn't just some saying. She knew herself it was true. As the pathway curved, she heard the blasts of a firefight. She stopped at the crossing, her arm cannon ready as she took a quick glance at the skirmish. Gandesians fighting against Gandesians. The larger unit was quickly gaining the upper hand. She squinted, trying to make out the soldiers fighting on the other side. Her heart clenched inside her. Her sister was right in the thick of it. Instinctively, she reached into the side pocket of her pack, grabbing onto a notched metal cylinder. Pressing the button on the side, she lobbed it toward them, then turned down her ear implants right as it landed. The noise grenade went off. The soldiers grabbed their ears, stunned by the blast of sound. Her heart returned as she aimed her arm cannon and fired. Instead of releasing its charge, the nozzle glowed red, then white, then fuck. The charge backfired, burning through the wrist piece of her arm cannon and scorching her skin. Her fingers flew, struggling to undo the clasps. It was about to explode. Finally, she jerked it off and tossed the unit into the cluster of soldiers. The pulse came all at once, violent, corrosive, with a cloud of red dust. Asala backstepped to avoid it, but she had already breathed it all in. God's damn fungus. Persistent little shit. The fungus must have gotten into her weapons supply when they were back at the camp. It was an intelligent, sentient life form. It knew what it was doing, stowing away on her own ship, crusting over her own pistols, and making them completely useless. The soldiers were on the floor from the blast, yet all still alive. Now coated completely in red dust, they whispered incoherent words to invisible people. She glanced at their eyes, all red and open and staring into some unknown. Their minds were elsewhere, she knew. The fungus had worked quickly. Asala made her way through the red haze. The dust-like spores hung in the air, so thick that it had short-circuited the controls of her suit. She couldn't get her helmet back on. She felt the spores attached to her skin, and some of them were so small that there was no way around it. She had to breathe it in, Finally, she saw a dark shadow behind the dense red veil. "This is all your fault." Asala couldn't see her face, but she knew from her voice who it was. "Dayu." Asala held her empty hands up. "I just want to talk." "You want to talk? You attacked my soldiers. It doesn't seem like you're here to talk." Asala could have pointed out that Dayu's own soldiers were the ones attacking her, but she held back. There was something off about her sister. A trail of red coated Dayu's forehead. From afar, it looked like blood, but Asala knew it was the fungus. It had already taken her, amplifying her emotions. "Don't come any closer," her sister warned as she raised her pistol. "I know what you're here to do." "Dayu," Asala repeated. "Sister." Dayu pulled the trigger, but the nozzle only sizzled. Her sister threw her weapon to the floor. The whites of her eyes were pulsing red. "I told you that's not me." And then she looked up, as if she was seeing something else entirely. "Don't make me remember." Her head snapped back down, her gaze searing into Asala. "You did it. You took them away." Dayu's fist flew at her in a fury. "Enough, Dayu," Asala pleaded. The fungus had gotten a hold of her sister's nervous system. She didn't know what it was showing her, but she knew this all had to stop. "Enough!" Asala wrapped her arms around her, struggling against the sheer power of her limbs. I'm here." She held her, trying to show her the love she had because she couldn't shape the words in her mouth to actually say it. As she looked down, her vision burned red, and she knew the fungus's presence was nudging her, guiding her. When her sight cleared, Dayu was gone, and she was holding someone else. This woman in her arms, she was beautiful, and she was smiling, and she made her feel whole. The woman sang softly to her. "Hana," she hummed and hummed. Asala pushed away, blinking through the haze as reality returned to her. She searched for her sister's ink-black eyes. Who was that? But Hana's gaze was tilted upward. Her mind turned to a separate memory entirely. "You thought you could save me, rescue me like I was some royal Lucknomi from our legends," she said weakly. For a moment, Asala could see a grim void inside her. "You didn't save me." The anger in her sister's voice made the world around them tip, until finally, Asala was in another time and place. It was a ship. This same ship. She was alone. She stood by the window searching, all the time searching. In the glare of the window, she saw her sister's reflection staring back at her. Her hands, her sister's hands, reached out to the stars beyond, to the wife and children left behind. But all she felt was emptiness. A cold sadness swept over her like a shock to her system. The fungus wanted to share her sister's memories with her, but that didn't mean it'd be easy. "Stop it," she thought. But her sister's memory persisted. "No, I don't want to see it." She couldn't bear it, this unshakable sadness. The tears rolled down her cheeks, and she couldn't even wipe them away. So she fought. And when she blinked, she was back in the red haze. She was on top of Dayu, strangling her. She looked down at her sister's face, growing purple as she struggled to breathe. Asala rolled off her. "I didn't mean to." Her sister pulled herself to her knees, coughing. Asala's body swayed as the weight of her actions caved in on her. She could have killed her. Asala reached out. Dayu jerked away, still shaking, her lips pulled tight. "Oh gods, what have I done?" Dayu's memories lingered inside her. Joy had left her the moment Asala took her sister through the wormhole. Her sister was here now, but her heart was somewhere else entirely. Asala always stood by her actions, but it was staring her right in the face. Deep down, she knew what she'd done was a mistake, taking her sister away from the people she loved the most, her wife, her family. But Asala had forced herself to be blind to it all. She pushed away from the idea of her sister's life. It meant that Dio had already moved on when all Asala wanted was to return to what used to be. She clung to that feeling of them running through fields of snow, their laughter cracking the cold air. She would look back and her sister would smile. That was all she wanted to see, that joy. Asala felt a brush of cold tickle her cheek, and she could almost feel the snow. She looked down at her hands until the scars on her palms faded, and snowflakes fell on fresh skin. Before her, 2 children ran like hell to the horizon, kicking the soft snow at their feet. There they were, their younger selves, children of Hypatia. One of the girls ran to her, reaching her small hands up, the fingertips smeared with dry black ink. Asala crouched to meet her. "Onward, Asala," little Dio said. "Keep moving." "But I don't want to forget," she told her. Her sister pulled her forward and pointed back at the deep but fragile tracks they left behind. "You can still see our footsteps." The child laughed playfully as she raced forward. Asala followed, not wanting to lose sight of her, of that smile. Around her, the snow melted, and so did their footsteps. But instead of feeling loss, a new warmth hugged her close. When she looked down, she saw the face of a child she'd never seen before, showing off a broad and toothy grin. She heard the familiar laughter of her youth and looked out to see another young girl doing cartwheels through the tall grass. And watching over them was Hana, all grown up, proud and happy. That joyful expression, different now, older. But it was that smile nonetheless. "Onward," a distant voice whispered in her ear. The colors around her softened like strokes of watercolor. Asala breathed deep and felt the sun. When the red veil lifted from her mind, Hana was on her knees, rocking slowly back and forth, her fingers digging into her thighs. It felt like she had been attacked on a completely different playing field. Whatever it was, it had taken her mind, invaded it, shaped it. In this short span of time, she had seen so much that she had tried to forget. A lot of it was for good reason. She was only a child when Hypatia had succumbed to its doom. Asala had found a way out earlier while she had stayed. She was awake now, but the images and emotions of the past wouldn't let go. The hunger that stabbed her shrunken belly, the vision of bodies lying frozen on the street, the fear that she'd wake up, and one day that'd be her. Grief. So much unspoken grief. Hana. Her eyes widened at the sound of her own name. She looked up to see Asala across from her. "Hana," Asala repeated over and over, like she was reeling her in, tugging her back to the world. Her sister had never spoken her real name until now, and she never realized how much she needed to hear it. She'd grown used to her sister's rough tones, but now Asala's voice was careful, like falling snow. "I saw what makes you smile." Hana blinked quickly as she realized what Asala meant. Their faces ebbed back into her mind, clearing out the debris that this mental blast had taken on her. "My family." Her daughter's eyes, so bright and curious, even though they were both now fully grown. Her wife's gentle kiss. All of it flickered up like candles in the dark. I understand now. That's why you want to go back, Asala said. Hana, my sister, I'm sorry. I will tell you forever that I'm sorry. Asala reached out to her like she had many times before. Hana's eyes gleamed at the freshness of a memory. While the calamity she had experienced inside her mind had unearthed so much pain, it had also returned something she once cherished. It was a simple memory, that first candle that distracted her from the darkness. I had forgotten. She held Asala's gaze. The moments before you left Hypatia. You wouldn't let go of my hand. Hana let her fingers intertwine with her sister's, like the keys to an old lock. She remembered how powerful their bond had felt. Their arms were like sticks then, and now they were muscled and scarred. They were arms that brought death, but were still able to conjure love. It spoke to me. What it gave me was a gift, Asala said as she motioned to the red dust surrounding them. What did it show you? Hana looked off into distance, the memory still bright like a flare. I saw it all. The pain that would come if salvation was lost. She looked out through the observation windows at the stars beyond. I will find home, Asala. Peacefully. And I will do whatever I can to help. Hana nodded as she stood and pulled her sister up. That was when she caught sight of a separate ship moving outside. As far as she knew, none of the ships in her fleet were scheduled for departure. Her eyes narrowed. It wasn't one of her ships, it was the Vela. Uzochi's ship had detached from its airlock and was pointed towards Salvation. Adeo's voice crackled through her comms piece. Commander? Her heart relaxed, knowing that her trusted officer was still alive. But she couldn't put her guard down, not with Uzochi acting against her and her remaining fleet. She pressed onto her comms button so her voice would transmit. I know. Uzochi orchestrated that mutiny and she's running like a coward. It's worse, Adeo said. Uzochi is going forward with the attack. That's impossible, Asala cut in. Then she touched her earpiece. Niko, are you there? Asala's expression grew more severe as she listened to her colleagues' communications, and then she nodded in confirmation. It's true. There are a few missiles unaccounted for. Hana cursed softly to herself. She shouldn't have ever trusted Uzochi. She must have transferred them onto the Vela without her knowing. Hana tried to dampen the panic in her voice. A few missiles are still enough to level the entire planet. Then what do we do? For once, Asala was looking to her for leadership. Hana paced, going through her Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. But her sudden rekindling with her childhood memories had jostled one of her favorite pastimes. Do you remember when we used to play hawk dive when we were kids? Asala nodded. Of course. You were the hawk, and I was always the Plemming. You would never stop until you caught me. Hana stared at Uzochi's ship. Uzochi may have taken their missiles, but Hana still had the unequivocal power of the Gandesian fleet behind her. Let's go hunting.
You're listening to The Vela Salvation by Maura Milan, starring Robin Miles. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. The Vela Salvation is written by Ashley Poston, Maura Milan, Nicole Givens-Kurtz, and Sangu Mandana. It is produced by Rhoda Bilyeza and executive produced by Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.